And I think one of those things, for me at least, he became almost a larger than life figure. You learn about him reintegrating the NFL. Then you learn he was a movie star. Then you just keep learning more and more about him. And I think for me, as the historian and the researcher, people like that in history, again, another man like that is Jackie Robinson. Just learning more and more about their story, I think it takes you to that next level, wanting to learn more and more about their story. Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it.
Welcome, everybody. This is Jason from 1939bruins.com. Today, I have a chance to feature one of the top Kenny Washington collectors in the country, Jeremy Swick. So, Jeremy, welcome.
I appreciate that, Jason. So much of it is really, for me at least, throughout my career at different museums and all that, it's really just continue to combine my passions, find what I'm interested in, and just kind of going after it. And it's kind of how Kenny Washington ended up becoming a huge interest of mine.
Fantastic. Well, that's exactly where I want to go. But before, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, I think you were wearing a 1946 throwback Kenny Washington jersey. Am I right? Do you want to show that off a little bit?
Yeah, I sure am. So I was able to pick it up from the NFLshop.com. They had it offered for, a Kenny Washington jersey. And let me grab one more thing. I'll show you that I am not wearing currently. And this was also made by the NFL. It is a Kenny Washington Circulate t-shirt, I should say.
Oh, that is fantastic. And that is, I believe, the same photo. Oh, the back too. That is the front, I believe, is the same photo on Dan Taylor's Kenny Washington biography, if I'm right.
It sure is.
Yeah.
It sure is.
What a great picture.
That's the one I don't wear. That's
right. Yeah. Now, if we were in charge of college football and maybe the NFL, am I right? We might nominate that for the logo.
I would love that.
I would do that. So this ties into what I really want to know, which is, how did you get interested in Kenny Washington specifically? He's obviously a favorite of yours, both as a historian, but also as a collector. Why Kenny?
Jason, I appreciate that. So a little bit about my background in education. I got my undergrad in history and more so education. I ended up earning my master's in public history, where I focused on African-American history, primarily more of the larger scopes. Of course, I looked at things like civil rights movement and things like that, but it was more how it all combined, including things like Black Power, Black nationalism, all in the backdrop of the Cold War. And just really how those experiences for African Americans were shaped. And it's always tough. I always say, I wish I was a scientist sometimes. A controlled experiment in just the human narrative. But of course, there's so many things that tie into history that one can't happen without the other. And so using that, one of the things was my sports background. It kept getting closer and closer, I guess, to the sun in that sense, where I just kept wanting to learn more and more about sports, more and more about history. And through my research, I ended up writing my master's thesis on college football stadiums in the 1920s at Illinois, Indiana, and Minnesota, looking at memorial stadiums. But I kept coming across this name, not obviously in that research, but in my African-American history, about this guy named Kenny Washington. And I think one of those things, for me at least, he became almost a larger than life figure. You learn about him reintegrating the NFL. Then you learn he was a movie star. Then you just keep learning more and more about him. And I think for me, as the historian and the researcher, people like that in history, again, another man like that is Jackie Robinson. Just learning more and more about their story, I think it takes you to that next level, wanting to learn more and more about their story, if that makes sense.
No, that exactly makes sense. And I love what you say about Kenny. I love what you say about Jackie. I'll add the other man that integrated the NFL in 1946. Woody Strode is ridiculous. If you learn, even beyond what he did with the NFL, his time with the Bruins, his life is absolutely a movie. And I think it's one of the things that draws me in as well, right? With all these guys, and we'll get to this at the end of the interview. I want to save this for the end. These guys, other than Jackie, aren't really household names, sadly enough, right? And when you think about their contributions, it's crazy that they're not household names. But then when you learn even more, it's even crazier. So we're going to get back to that. But talk to me about the transition to become going from, let's say, a Kenny Washington fan to a Kenny Washington collector, because you've absolutely mastered that art.
I appreciate it. I love that you mentioned Woody, and it's funny because, as you mentioned, it's like a movie. The fact that they all knew each other, they all played together, that in some aspects a lot of them grew up together or at least knew of each other. It's again, it's a film set for Hollywood, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And of course, all those guys had big parts in movies in Hollywood as well. So kind of a funny coincidence, but why wouldn't you cast those guys, right? Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well,
So what were some of the first Kenny Washington items you got? I'm going to tell you on my end, right? When I first learned about him, it was kind of like, I didn't even know there would be cards, right? I didn't even realize there would be things to collect, right? Because there isn't a lot from football in those days. So it was like, wow, this guy's got a card. That's sort of how I jumped in. But tell me your story in terms of becoming a collector.
yeah, absolutely. I'll have to go back a little farther. So I've collected my whole life. You can see my background. There's quite a few
Oh, yeah.
trinkets and pieces of sports memorabilia, and this is kind of just scratching the surface. But I grew up collecting sports cards, and of course, unfortunately for me, it was the '90s era. A lot of junk wax, but it kind of fostered that love for collecting in me. And I always tell people I was kind of like that kid who kind of grew up, but never really grew up. And through the historical lens, I started gravitating towards vintage and truly vintage World War II era football cards. And so I started with the exhibit card set, which, fun fact, they were the first football cards made solely for the idea of collecting, not as a premium for gum, tobacco, cigarettes, or anything like that. And I
Mhm.
just kind of was enamored with those. And again, when I leave the Hall of Fame, I'm no longer around all this history. And of course, I had a couple Kenny Washington cards previously. And I think part of it was just grabbing onto something I could collect. Again, as a collector, the cards were the first things that really hit my radar. Seeing that there was only about four or so, not including reprints in the '90s, which made it a little bit more attainable, if that makes sense. Where it's not
Absolutely.
like collecting everything.
Right. Yeah, I got that. So it's funny. I was doing a lot of collecting in the junk wax era as well. So I'm going to guess, right, before you had Kenny in your collection, you probably had Brian Bosworth, Todd Marinovich, and screw down holders, right? That was going to be your
Oh,
retirement back in the day.
absolutely, absolutely. Thankfully, didn't put too much investment in a lot of those. A big one, and unfortunately, I still have. I'm looking over. I have a lot of Favre rookie cards, and
Okay.
so again, being a kid from Wisconsin, growing up, I've been fortunate. Brett Favre, and then Aaron Rodgers, and now hopefully Jordan Love. We've had three back to back, at least two back to back, really, really good quarterbacks, and Love is hopefully well on his way. But again, collecting those guys, it just made me excited to feel that connection to sports.
Yeah, no doubt. It's been a long time since Dan Mikowski. So yeah, Green Bay's been blessed. I'm here in Chicago, so I can't give too much love, right? But no, fantastic. So in terms of your Kenny Washington collection, and I've seen some of the things you have, and to me it's just unreal. But what are a couple of your favorite items, right? And you don't have to stop at a couple if you want to show even more or talk about even more.
We got a few, and I made sure to grab them. But it's funny because I think one of the things, if you really get into collecting, there's always that next level.
Yep.
And once you realize you are the tiniest fish in the ocean, in the multiple oceans, for me, it made it a lot more fun because I'm always curious to see what is out there. I started doing searches on eBay and kind of the more traditional sites because I was like, all right, I have the four cards. I have the two 1948 rookies, 49 cards. And I was like, okay, what else is out there? And for whatever reason, I started typing in different things on eBay. And the first thing that came up was a high school letter of Kenny's from 1935.
What?
And of course, the person who had it for sale, I learned later they had bought it at a auction house type storage unit thing, but they had the price tag on it for about 10 grand on eBay. And in
Ooh,
my brain, I'm like, well, I can definitely not afford that.
yeah.
But my curiosity is always, what is that? Is that the I don't want to sell it price? Is that the price to appease maybe a significant other saying that, hey, I have it for sale. I'm going to get rid of it. But
Right.
knowing that number won't come to realization. After about a week or two, I got a message, or I should say an offer for much, much lower than 10 grand. And I was like, okay, well, this person is least interested in playing ball.
Yeah.
I kind of inquired more, talking about, and I won't lie, I parlayed my interest in sports history because that sometimes helps or hurts in
Okay.
negotiations.
You
It's a
got it. You got
50-50
it.
double-edged sword, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of explained what my goal with it was, obviously to keep it in my collection, but eventually hope to have it on loan to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But eventually we came to a price that was agreeable for both of us. And so I'm gonna pull that out right now and show you.
This is unbelievable. I'll give a quick collector tip, right? Based on that, while you're getting that ready,
Yeah.
is I've scored some really good deals myself, whether it's Kenny or whether it's baseball, which is my main collection, to be honest. Often when the person realizes it's something I'm going to keep in my collection, it's a player I really like, somebody I collect, and I'm not looking to flip it right away, right? Or ever, I should say. I'm not looking to flip it ever. So that is a collector's tip. Oh my goodness. And that is Lincoln High School, right?
That is
We're
it.
taking the L here, but not that kind of L. This is Lincoln High School. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's his 1935 varsity letter
Good
from
Lord.
his junior year in high school.
Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And is there even a story of how one acquires something like that? I mean, obviously, I would
So,
think there would only be 3 total in the universe, right? 1 per year or something like that. But
and
uh,
so this might be a little difficult to see, but this is the
yeah,
1935 certificate he got.
good Lord. Jeremy.
And it is, it came with it. And in talking to the guy, who I'm not going to give his eBay name because I think he may have more. So
Okay.
he was a great guy, but he knew the Washington family pretty well, and
Okay.
this kind of came up at a storage auction, and uh, it was a different, I should say, probably a different part of the family, but he found that, and it was almost by accident more so that he came across it. It wasn't sitting there in a gold case or anything. It was tucked away and paper clipped together, which the second I got it, I removed the paper clips, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of those things where he just had it, didn't really have a use for it, didn't really know a whole lot about it, didn't I don't even know if he was super interested in it per se, but he just knew it was something you probably do a quick Google search, and even that didn't come up with a whole lot. But the fact that I was able to acquire it was just remarkable.
That
So this is a 1940 belt buckle that belonged to Kenny Washington that he received from the college all-star team.
oh wow. My
And how do we know it belonged to Mr. Washington?
what do we got there on the
On the
back?
back, it says K Washington on the back.
You got it. Now let me ask you this, because I've got a game program from something called the Kenny Washington All-Stars. They were playing the Ernie Nevers All-Stars up at Kezar in San Francisco. And this was pretty much right after Kenny finished his college career. Yeah, that would be the one. I was trying to think of the date, February. So would that be essentially where the belt buckle came from?
So it would actually be before that. This
Okay.
would have been when the pros would play the college all-star team in Chicago.
Oh, yes,
It
yes,
was
yes.
it was
Okay.
the game by the Chicago Tribune. They always got the all-star jerseys, and for those kind of hardcore collectors, can imagine the all-star game jerseys and things like that with the all-American type sweaters and things like that. So that's where he likely would have gotten that from.
I was just scrolling through eBay, not even looking at Kenny Washington, just kind of, doom scrolling all kinds of stuff. And I come to a 1935, coincidentally, Lincoln High School yearbook, and the person advertises it 1935, Lincoln High School, Los Angeles, Robert Preston, actor, right? Well, Robert Preston, the future music man, did go to high school with Kenny, right? Well, anyways, there's only one picture, and it's this picture of the ratty old cover. This thing's not in great shape. He's got no pictures of anything inside. So I write to him, and I didn't really know at the time, I assume Kenny's in there somewhere, but is he in there with like 3 pictures? Is it just, maybe one tiny little, part of a team photo. So I asked him, could you check for me if Kenny Washington's in there and maybe send me a couple photos? And at any rate, he basically told me he was a little too busy to do that. But, if I want to buy it, I could buy it. So I thought, what the heck? I'm going to roll the dice. Well, the yearbook comes. I paid almost nothing for it, to be honest, right? It is in bad shape, but I'm flipping through. Not only is Kenny pictured in the yearbook something like 6 or 7 times, he's literally signed his photo 5 times, right? So, Kenny Washington is a tough autograph, right? If somebody went on eBay right now, they might see one, right?
Maybe.
Tough autograph. I end up with 5, right? And again, if you were looking Kenny Washington, it wouldn't have come up in your search. Now, if you were looking Robert Preston, it would have come up in your search. But for the Music Man fans out there, I will say I don't believe Preston's signature is in there. He actually went by a different name in high school, but I even checked that. So no Music Man, but 5.
But 5 Kenny Washington
5 Kingfish
signatures. And it's so funny because it's so hard to come by. And the other thing is, not many people are looking at yearbooks like that, but I know exactly what yearbook you were talking about. And I saw there was only one picture, got distracted, kind of forgot about it for a little while, and then I went to check again, and I'm glad it went to a good home. I'll put it that way.
No, I know, man. I mean, that's how it is. It's like when there's so little out there for a guy you collect, your friends in the hobby also can become your rivals, right? So, okay. So I'm looking at a signature right now.
We're looking at a signature. Let's see if there we go.
Yeah, there you go. That is a beauty, and it's dated. I can't quite make out the date, but
10/28, 1958.
Wow. Okay, 1958. So, gosh, I know by then Kenny Washington would have been a father. I believe his son was playing quarterback at Dorsey High School, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. And again, that was just an eBay find because, like you mentioned, they're out there. Deals are out there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and I've realized, as you mentioned, everyone is kind of collecting different things and different objectives. And maybe they have a Kenny Washington piece, but that's not their main collection.
I'll show you part of my modest collection.
I would love to see.
So, because we know there isn't a lot out there for Kenny. So you can see here, I've got 2 of the 1948 Leaf. I've got the black letter and the white letter, the white being a little bit tougher. But I've got, as well, pardon me, I should say, I've got 2 of the black letter 1948. I wish I had a 1949. I don't yet. I've got 2 of the Bowman rookie, and then also 2 of that 1990 reprint that you alluded to. And then, right, because there's so little to come by, I've defined this idea of Kenny Washington adjacent. And so I've got 2 kind of funny items in the bottom row. The first is a Negro Leagues baseball card from 2020 of journalist Hallie Harding. And you would know his story. Hallie Harding had everything to do with Kenny breaking the color barrier with the Rams. So pretty awesome. They just got a baseball card. And then the dean of NFL officials, Jim Tunney. And of course, because the Lincoln High history, referee Jim Tunney's father was Kenny's coach at Lincoln. And then because we love the Dan Taylor book, Walking Alone, Jim Tunney Jr., if I can say Jr. for a guy who's 95 years old and still with us, wrote the foreword to that book talking about how he remembered watching Kenny, right? When Jim Tunney Jr. was a very little kid watching Kenny practice and getting to go to an occasional game. So that's a bit of the modest collection.
Man, I love that. It's funny because, again, I also had to kind of take the sports history lens off, the cap off, the history cap, if you will, and start thinking outside the box of what else might be out there of Kenny's. And of course, he was a movie star.
Yep.
And it started getting down looking for this. So this is the still from Pinky.
Yes. That is insane. I've never seen one of those. I've never seen. I feel like I know the picture from IMDb, basically.
Yes.
But wow. Oh, good Lord.
And so it was literally one of those movie stills that, they would have. This is the other side. But it was the other actors that were actually highlighted.
Yes.
Kenny wasn't really even mentioned in that specific sales.
Yeah, hot tip. Kenny's dad, Blue, was in almost 100 films, some of them with John Wayne, and you'll occasionally see Blue Washington associated with a photo that's only labeled John Wayne. So
Yes,
that's pretty
it
cool.
was the 1933 movie. I want to say it was the
Maybe Haunted Gold.
Yep, Haunted Gold. Yes,
Haunted Gold.
I
Yeah,
just I just watched a John Wayne movie with my folks the other day, and we I was talking. I was like, it's funny because although he's not a household name, pretty much anyone who's in my family or my friends have heard who Kenny Washington is. Probably at nausea at this point because I'll bring him up in pretty much any conversation I possibly can.
that's
I
that's what
wanted
guys
to
that's what
show
guys
you.
like us do. By the way, on the subject of John Wayne and Kenny adjacent, the man who shot Liberty Valance, Woody Strode, has a great role in that movie.
A interesting find in the sense that I was on a website that looked like it was made in the mid 2000s. It was a movie website.
Okay.
It looked like it'd been on a forum or something like that, and the tech wasn't there, but they had this. And
Ooh.
so it is
That-
a lobby card from Kenny Washington, starring Kenny Washington in Crooked Money, which was the
yes.
rename of While Thousands Cheered.
Insane. I definitely need one of those. Definitely need one of those.
And while that happened, I started and I knew right away in my soul, without going too much research when I first found it, I was like, this is going to be a lost movie for sure. There's no way. Of
That's right.
course, it's one of those that has never been found,
Yep.
likely burned in nitrate or just thrown away because the thing about movies, as I'm sure you know, they didn't keep them. There was
That's right.
no need. Once it was done in theaters, thrown out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on top of that,
Oh, look at that. And there's Kenny himself. And I think Ruby D. I think,
yes,
or no, Ruby D was in the Jackie Robinson story. Okay. I'm blanking on the name of this co star. I do believe she went to Manual Arts High School in Los Angeles.
I
That's what I,
believe you are correct, and I can't
yeah.
think of her
Now,
name of.
let me ask you
Yes,
this, going
sir.
a little bit off the subject of collectibles, right?
Yeah.
And this to me is unbelievable, right? But you've been closer to the sport, closer to the history, so you may have some insights here. I'm going to say, yeah, my friends, they know Kenny Washington because I don't shut up, right? But I feel like I know all these people that are football fans. And I'm going to say your typical football fan, even your typical diehard, literally has never heard of Kenny Washington. Why do you think that is? And then on the flip side, is there anything you think that the league or just folks like us should be doing to raise his profile?
So I think one of those things is it doesn't surprise me terribly because if it's not talked about, if it's not in your team's lexicon like it should be, I think it's something that I wouldn't even expect the average or standard fan to know. I think a lot of times with the NFL, I think for a long time period, it was that uncomfortable mixed message because he technically
Mm,
he didn't break the color barrier, he reintegrated the color barrier,
right.
which that kind of leads again the black eye on the league, if you will, because they had that period where just no African Americans were allowed to play. So I think a lot of that with them is the desire to not really bring that story up. But I will give credit to the Los Angeles Rams. They came out with that short Kingfish documentary.
Yep.
They recently did this collection with the
Yep.
Rams, and they have started to, and I just acquired this little guy. It was a nice little pin.
Oh, uh-oh. I gotta hit eBay now.
Yeah, it was only about $20, but they're at the store, I believe, in Los Angeles when they were doing this, and this was this last year that they started to come out with these Kenny Washington items and memorabilia. So I'll definitely give credit to the Rams to talk about that story more. And I would love to see the NFL just do something more. And again, if they ever decide to or ever come through with making some sort of movie, obviously a well done movie, I think that could really open the door, open the interest of learning more about Kenny.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my opinion. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, right? And I grew up in LA. That's important to know, just like Kenny did, right? I grew up right by UCLA, in fact. So my opinion, right, based on everything he's accomplished, in my opinion, Kenny shouldn't just be a name people know, right? I believe Kenny should be a Los Angeles icon, I believe he should be a UCLA icon. I believe he should be a Rams icon. And I believe he should be an NFL icon, right? And at the moment, he is none of those. Now, to us, of course, he is, right? But think about the number of steps or phases between being a guy nobody's ever heard of to being an icon, right? That's a big gap. But in my opinion, that's the status he deserves in every one of those arenas. And so, I try to do my small part. I got 1939bruins.com. I talked to a guy like you that's one of the biggest fans, one of the best collectors out there, and does your part to promote Kenny and his legacy. You hosted Dan Taylor, who wrote that outstanding book. But it is absolutely bonkers to me, right, that a guy that I believe should be an icon 4 times over is literally an unknown name still to even the diehard football fans out there.
I find it really fascinating, and again, I completely agree. Clearly, I'm 100% biased as well in my thoughts on Kenny, but I think, and I'm hoping that these little steps, and more people, even the league, talking just a little bit more each year, or each time there's an opportunity to share someone like Kenny, or like his story. And I think it takes people like you and people like I to share that story to whoever will listen. Really spread the gospel of Kenny Washington and Woody Strode, and you know Ray Bartlett, and all those guys.
There you go. There you go. Well, let me do this. I loved talking to you. I could probably go 10 hours just talking to you about Kenny, and then we'd move on to Woody and these other guys too. But I'm going to actually throw you a curveball because, Jeremy, I did a little bit of my own research leading up to this interview. Am I right that you were, or maybe still are, a rugby player?
Yes, I am still a rugby player. I've been playing 15 years now. I'm fortunate. I work with USA Club Rugby, and actually headed out to nationals next weekend excuse me, not to coach, to cover social media coverage for the teams in the championships, and just again share that history of rugby and sports and all that good stuff.
Well, fantastic. Then what I'm about to ask you either is going to blow your mind, or you're going to say, come on, Jason, of course I knew that. Okay. So 1948 Leaf set. Are you familiar with Mike Dimitro?
I am. I am. That is awesome. I love that.
So for folks listening that are like, who, I'll just say, right, I was not familiar. I was going through that Leaf set, really just looking, are there other UCLA guys in the set? And of course, there's Bob Waterfield. And besides Kenny, I find this one guy, Mike Dimitro. So I'm like, oh, let me check him out. Let me learn about this guy. So after UCLA, and you know the story probably better than I do, there's a book called No Helmets Required if people want to check that out. But I guess he had the idea to recruit a bunch of fellow college football players or college football alums and basically go to Australia and New Zealand, right? The toughest rugby in the world, and put these guys who never played in matches against these guys. And remarkably, I think they won a few, right? I don't know what their record was. Maybe they won 2 and lost 100, but the point is they won some games, right? And then there's some sort of postscript in terms of coming back to the US and really trying to popularize rugby. But it's just, when we were talking about Kenny, Woody, Jackie, these guys where you learn a little bit and then you go down some rabbit hole because it's just so crazy, all the things they did. I got to say, Mike Dimitro to me, right, is like, here's this guy I'd literally never heard of. He was part of a Bruins undefeated team, so shame on me, right? But then you look and you're like, are you kidding me? So at any rate, I'm guessing that's a card you've got.
Man, I do have it. I was looking for it. I think I might have just got it graded. I'll definitely send you a picture over. I'm working on that Leaf set right now. It's funny you mentioned that because, again, rabbit holes. And at this point, I realized that probably defined my whole career. In high school, I played rugby and found it super interesting. I think even before I was a historian. So I wanted to learn more about rugby. I wanted to learn more about the game. And I actually ended up writing my undergraduate on early American rugby. During 1905, there was the rule changes, line of scrimmage, ways to make the game of football safer. Prior to that, it looked a lot more like rugby. And even before that, it looked a lot more like soccer as we know it. Anyway, fast forward a little bit. 1905, Teddy Roosevelt comes out with the rule changes, save the game, legalize the forward pass. A lot of teams on the West Coast did not really like that. They didn't either think the game was safe enough or they just changed the rules. So a splinter cell, if you will, of them went and started playing rugby. And they would bring in coaches from overseas to train the Stanford and teams like that on more of the rugby game than it was the American football game. This kind of creates about a 10 to 15-year window of a lot of the West Coast playing more rugby than they were playing American football. Of course, that leads us to inviting over Australia. We beat them narrowly in rugby, and we kind of think we're the big tough guys of the rugby world because we beat this supposedly really good Australian team. Well, of course, not far after that, the New Zealand All Blacks. And for anyone who knows rugby or has heard rugby, or at least have maybe seen the haka, the All Blacks are
Yeah.
the team
Oh, of
from New
course. Yeah.
Zealand that made that famous.
Yeah. The
Well,
ritual.
they come to the West Coast and wipe the floor with. I think they outscored their opponents 222 to like 26 or something like that. And most of those points were in one game on clay in a very rainy situation. So it's funny that you mentioned that because rugby was actually kind of my first historical lens into early American football, if that makes sense.
It totally does. You are absolute wealth of information. Jeremy, fantastic to have you. Literally, I could talk to you all day. Man, you are the GOAT when it comes to Kenny Collectibles, and keep spreading the word. Let's do what we can, right? You and me, to raise his profile, both in the hobby, but more importantly, in the world at large. Take it easy, my man.
Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate it.
All right.
That was another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.